everyone, it's Jack from Cultaholic.com and it's time to talk about more of the lovely wrestling news. Of course, it's WrestleMania coming up, but we're not going to do any spoilers. And to be fair, we've not even seen any spoilers. We haven't seen any spoilers anywhere on the internet. Everyone's doing a really good job, which is nice to see. Hopefully, that holds true for the next day or so until day one of WrestleMania 36. But for now, let's take a look at some headlines from elsewhere around the wrestling landscape. First of all, police attempted to shut down this week's AEW Dynamite taping. Next up, John Cena has given his thoughts on the current roster. And finally, JR has explained his recent absences from AEW Dynamite. First up, let's go to Wrestling Inc., who are reporting that yes, police tried to shut down this week's AEW Dynamite taping. Pretty hefty news there, but they were unsuccessful. Yes, apparently when police showed up at the undisclosed location, which turns out to have been apparently QT Marshall's gym somewhere in Georgia rather than the usual daily place in Jacksonville, Florida, when the police turned up, apparently AEW had all the required paperwork necessary to stop the show from being shut down. Apparently those state officials did insist upon staying for the whole tapings just to make sure that guidelines were being met, which I assume AEW were fine with. Well, they have to be, otherwise the tapings would have been shut down. But on the bright side for them, they were at least allowed to continue filming. It's not quite certain though what will happen next week. Either they'll have to find another new location or just call a stop to things for now and wait it out. Apparently, various news sources have reported that it seems as though the amount of taping that AEW has done this week on both apparently Tuesday and Wednesday was enough to carry them through until sort of, I think I read mid-May in a couple of places, so they've got a couple of months out of it potentially. But on the other hand, it does mean of course that it's an absolute finite resource of wrestling to show in the future. Why would they have to stop? Well, apparently today the state of Georgia are implementing a stay-at-home or a shelter-in-place order, which sounds pretty much the same but a fancier version of Florida's stay-at-home order, and that comes into effect straight away, like today. So it seems as though there'll be no more taping to be done at that location for AEW. So it remains to be seen whether they'll find a new location or just call a stop to things for now. And indeed, it remains to be seen what WWE does, because they are in the same boat pretty much with their home little base for now being in Florida also. So, bit of a tenuous time for pro wrestling heading forwards, but it was always going to end up this way, wasn't it? We'll just have to see where we go from here. Now, one of the things that WrestleMania really brings about is not only a sense of atmosphere amongst the fans around the world, but apparently, from what we've heard, a real sense of atmosphere amongst the wrestlers backstage and the various different performers on the show, because it's a special time of year. They get the same buzz that we do. It's WrestleMania season. Obviously, this year's WrestleMania is quite different, being held in an empty arena over 2 days, but at the same time, according to one superstar in particular, that sense of atmosphere still remains. John Morrison, one half of the current SmackDown Tag Team Champions, was speaking to Muscle and Fitness, and he explained how even though the atmosphere will be different, there's still that sense of excitement around the backstage area. He said, I mean, yeah, the atmosphere is a little bit different than an arena full of 100,000 people. Good job, Jomo, working the numbers a little bit there. But it's still WrestleMania. It still has this vibe. It still feels like the most important show of the year, and it still has that buzz backstage. And when I was reading this news story, I realized, wow, I really want there to be some kind of WWE 24 documentary on WrestleMania 36 to go out next year. Hopefully by next year, obviously everything will be in a better place in terms of, you know, the wrestling industry and people attending shows and everything, and we can look back on this as a weird and bizarre time. But also, I would be very interested to see if he's telling the truth, if that buzz still is there backstage, because it must be very different and very weird turning up. I guess it's less of a community atmosphere with less big groups of people around backstage, and I reckon it's quite strange and surreal for many of the people there, but as well, you can still see what he's saying. You can sort of understand where he's coming from in terms of everybody still feeling that buzz and still feeling that excitement, because they know, regardless of however many fans are there, this is still WrestleMania, and they're still having a WrestleMania match. Next up, well, he recently commented in a promo, of course, in character, about how Bray Wyatt was a bit of an entitled and lazy brat and didn't work hard enough to be successful, or that was the implication anyway. But what has John Cena got to say about the WWE roster of today in general? Let's find out. Cena was on Corey Graves' After the Bell podcast and said, SmackDown, Raw, NXT, you don't have one person you go to see, which sounds at first like he's saying there are no stars anymore. However, I think he's put a kinder spin on this. He says if you go to a show, you go to see 8 or 9 people. I don't think there's ever been more potential under one roof than right now. He goes on, the Attitude Era was the era of universal popularity, the opening match had a definitive storyline into the main event, and everyone in between had some sort of narrative. Now we have a few loosely crafted narratives and some big storylines and a lot of matches for the sake of action. So you can see that he's also not averse to criticizing WWE, but that doesn't seem to be with regards to the talent or with their level of ability, but rather the writing and the storytelling. So John wants more stories throughout the entire card, and I think I agree with that, to be honest. But then Cena does turn it around and call for more innovation amongst the modern day roster as well, he says, but I also believe that's on the performers to make something out of that. The best scenario is when they tell you, I don't know what we want tonight. That's when the rap guy was born, that's when the US title challenge was born. When they don't tell you what they want, they're giving you the freedom to create. And when they strictly tell you, you still have freedom, but it's defined in what they give you, which is a little bit contradictory, but I see what he's saying, sort of. He finishes by saying it takes being brave and doing stupid things and hoping they get over, and maybe you can wear wristbands when you're 43 and have it seem comfortable. Classic self-deprecating charm from Big Match John there. He says, I do think though, there's never been more athletic talent under one roof than right now. And it's a very interesting point of view, isn't it? Because it's kind of, Cena has definitely made the most of his situation and has maximized his potential just completely, and he has become one of the biggest stars in the history of wrestling. But for some people, you don't see this work. It's not a theory that works for everybody, as we've seen in the past. Guys like Zack Ryder, for example, guys who do try to innovate, guys who do try and get themselves over despite not really being given anything to work with. It just seems to depend who you are and how you do it, because Zack Ryder did it very organically and very well and very creatively, and he was kind of de-pushed for getting himself over without the bosses say so. So there's all this talk of taking risks and grabbing brass rings and everything, but personally, from what I've seen sometimes, it just kind of depends who you are, and some people just aren't given a fair chance. Next up, any of you who have been fortunate enough to attend a WrestleMania in real life, and well, to be fair, anyone who's just watched it will know that in recent years there are these commemorative folding chairs that everyone sits on, and then you can buy them at the end of the show. So well, there's no fans this year, so what's the deal, guys? Don't worry, WWE shop has you covered for a fee. The description reads thus: now is your chance to own the official WrestleMania 36 event folding chair. Quantities are limited, so don't miss out on this opportunity. The price is $99.99 for one, or $299.99 for a 4-pack. Now, I don't know quite how expensive the chairs usually are, but I guess the part of their appeal is that you've been to that event, you know, that's a chair from the event that you were at and had this special moment at. And unless you're collecting all these chairs, I don't see the point of buying, like, if no one's there. I guess it might be quite cool to have a bit of a chair from an event that no one was at, but I don't really see it. I don't see it at all. I understand totally the charm of the commemorative chairs when it's, you know, like last year or whatever, and everyone, I was there when Becky Lynch won the title and when Kofi won the title. What about this year? I wasn't there, but I've got a chair from there anyway. I guess, you know what, in fairness, WWE have probably got to shift their stock somehow. I guess they do have to put this on sale because they would have been selling them anyway had the show gone ahead. Just feels a bit weird, doesn't it? Feels like sort of buying a dead person's possessions. But yes, once again, those chairs, and I feel like a bit of a salesman now, those chairs are $99.99 for one, or $299.99 for 3 for a cheeky triple threat. Thanks very much. Those are available on WWEshop.com. Next up, according to PW Insider, Jim Cornette will have a very interesting upcoming guest on his podcast in terms of the recent, and it made quite a lot of waves as well, the recent Chris Benoit documentary by Vice, part of the Dark Side of the Ring Season 2. If you haven't watched it, I really recommend checking it out. There's a lot of interesting points of view on there from various different key figures. And also the second episode, oh man, it's on New Jack. It's on New Jack. I'm going to need to check that out as well, because that looks pretty interesting too. Although, you know, as wrestling fans, a lot of you will already have heard a lot of the stories about New Jack, but I think maybe it's worth a watch given that they'll be interviewing certain people who we might not have heard from. But back to the Chris Benoit one, because apparently Kevin Sullivan, the Taskmaster himself, is set to appear on Jim Cornette's podcast to talk specifically about his ex-wife, Nancy Benoit, and to talk about that whole incident. Now, apparently Sullivan was approached to take part in the Chris Benoit documentary, but decided against it and turned that down. And he's apparently also going to address that and explain that when he appears on Cornette's podcast as well. And for anybody who isn't familiar with Kevin Sullivan's whole place in this story, basically, as I mentioned just there, he was Nancy Benoit's husband before Chris Benoit. Then there was a storyline in WCW when all three were wrestling in WCW, and the story was that Woman, which is Nancy Benoit's character, was leaving Kevin Sullivan for Chris Benoit and having an affair with him. That turned out to be, that just happened. That turned out to be true, and led to sort of a dark joke in the business that Kevin Sullivan had booked his own divorce. That may explain why Sullivan declined to appear on the documentary, but the fact that he's going to talk about it on Jim Cornette's podcast is very interesting also. So maybe he didn't quite understand what kind of documentary it was. Maybe he didn't know if it would be in the right kind of taste, but maybe now having seen it, he regrets not being a part of it and now wants to speak out. I don't know the reasons. We'll find out when he appears on Cornette's podcast, and if there's any big updates, then we'll let you know. And finally, the commentary team on recent episodes of Dynamite have chopped and changed a little bit, haven't they? We've seen Tony Schiavone taking the play-by-play lead role, Cody stepping into like the colour commentary role, and Colt Cabana featuring as well. JR's obviously been missing, and he explained why when speaking to Wrestling Inc. It turns out that it was Tony Khan himself who convinced JR to not attend the shows for the foreseeable future, saying Tony Khan and I had a very long, thoughtful talk that he initiated. I'm an asset to the company in his view, and mine too, and he said, I've got to protect you because I know you won't protect yourself. And he's pretty much right, so JR admitting there that he's quite stubborn. So in any event, the decision was made to stay at home for a couple of weeks. I won't be on Dynamite this week or next until we see where this thing is headed. If it gets worse, I'm 68, I'm in the higher risk group, I don't want to die, I don't want to get the flu because my ego says, well, you got to be on TV. It's not the flu, but I see what he's saying there, and it does make total sense. And I'm glad that Tony Khan could have talked JR around to realizing this, not only for the betterment of JR's own health, but for the health of everybody around him as well. It's obviously better if JR, isolates himself from the wider world, as many of us are doing as well. And I think that, yeah, good on Tony Khan for making him realize that. And it'll be good for JR in the long run. So that's it for today's news update. Thank you very much for watching. I've been Jack from Cultaholic.com. For my daily match recommendation, we mentioned John Cena in this video, and I think I have to give a John Cena match recommendation. I'm going to go for a fairly recent one, 2017 Royal Rumble, John Cena taking on AJ Styles for the belt. What a match, brilliant match. If you've not seen it, what a treat. If you have seen it and it's been a little while, go back and watch it again because I think it holds up a lot over time. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you soon.